Greetings all, Dr. Raphael X here with another video. Please subscribe, click on the like button, notifications button, all that good stuff. And before anything else, let us begin with the sign of the cross. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Oh,
All
oh,
right. Well, I have a very special guest here, Dr. Verschueren. It's funny because some people say, "Oh, you always bring people on who have difficult last names to pronounce." So it's it's interesting. But he's written many books, author of this book right here, The Destructive Doctrines of Our Age. And it's a really important book, especially in our times that, where confusion is prevalent. Um, this is basically the book basically is a concise breakdown, I'll say, of the heretical doctrines today, philosophical and theological. Well, first of all, thank you, Dr. Rishoden, for coming on. And if you
my,
could just tell us a little bit what brought you to write this book, The Destructive Doctrines of Our Age.
the more you talk with people, sometimes during interviews or whatever, the more I read, the more I am baffled how some people can claim certain positions that you think, how is that possible? That
Mm,
goes against common sense. It goes against the Catholic religion, first of all. But even if you are not a Catholic yet, or never was, or never will be, that you think, it's important that you realize that there are at least doctrines around us, and many more, that that are very destructive to the human soul, to the human religion. And I have in this book 13 of them, and they we don't have time to discuss all of them, but with Raphael, I agree that we should start with syncretism.
Yeah, if
Do
I
you
could just
still
say
agree
that
with that? Yeah.
yeah, sure. It seems like you have 15. You said 13 or it's 15 of there's a table of contents right here. Get the book, very interesting, very profound yet simple at the same time explanations of each of these destructive doctrines. But yeah,
Yeah.
today we're going to talk about syncretism and Gnosticism. So if you can a little bit elaborate why is syncretism a destructive doctrine of our age? Because that's really interesting. I think it's very on point to talk about that today as something, that's almost mainstream in the church and today in just the natural realm of society, we can say.
Yeah, it's a heavy term, syncretism. So let me explain very briefly what it stands for. It it uh, it puts literally it means puts things together. They grow together. So why does that apply to Catholics, non-Catholic, to our culture? Because it says there are so many different religions. So there is a problem here. Can they all be true? Or is only one true? Catholics say there is only one true, but most people nowadays say, oh, they all have a part of the truth. So, and then you hear very often the, the story about this Raja in India who was sitting on his balcony,
Right.
and there was an elephant down the balcony, and five, six people who were all blind were touching a different part of that animal. And then one said an elephant is legs. Another said an elephant is trunks. And so they went on and on and on. And then finally, the Raja on the balcony says, hey, wait a minute. That's not the case. The elephant is a big animal that does have what some of you say, but it's much more. So what is so interesting about it is that many people use that story to say Catholics have only touched one part of that big animal, if I may use that image. And that means that what they claim is only true for a little part of religion, of God, or whatever. So the conclusion is we all worship the same God. We are all talking about the same elephant, to use that image. But we only have part of it in each religion. So we end up with what I would call a universal God, applicable to everyone, so general, so abstract that it becomes an empty shell. So let me say that part about syncretism. Excuse me. So what is the problem with that? Um, First of all, we have to realize that that parable, or whatever, it's not really a parable, of course, but it's a comparison. All of a sudden, that Raja on the balcony, he knows the whole thing. So could Catholics be the ones who know the whole thing? In this chapter of the book, and you are right, there are 15 chapters, and that means that is a very important conclusion, but we are not that far yet. So I always like to quote Chesterton, who said, some people say the earth is round, others say it's flat. Does that mean the earth doesn't have a shape at all? Of course it has a shape, but who knows about that shape? Some astronomers do, and so we know the full truth, more or less. Is it the same truth? Maybe not. So
Right.
I make in this chapter an important distinction, I think, between when you use a term, is that about the same reference? Do they speak about the same object? So when some people talk about a morning star, if you are familiar with that, I'm talking to the audience now. If you are familiar with that term, morning star, then you will sometimes say, yeah, but others say there is an evening star. Well, it turns out in astronomy that that is the same planet. It is Venus. And it is the same reference. Is that the same with religion? Is Catholicism or Christianity, if you want to see it broader, the same God as the Muslims claim? I don't think so. They are very different. Maybe the reference is the same. Maybe. I even doubt that. But maybe they have different descriptions.
Right.
Let's say the Venus of Aristotle or Ptolemy is maybe the same planet as the Venus of Galileo and modern astronomers. But that does not mean it's the same Venus. The one of Aristotle is, as we say nowadays, is the wrong one. And the god of Galileo, the Venus of Galileo, is another one, but very different from one of the other. So
Right.
we have to make a choice. We can't just say, yeah, they are talking about the same thing, but it's not really true. So is the God of Islam the same God as the God of Christianity? Or, as one book title said, is the father of Jesus the God of Mohammed? I don't think so. No one will claim that, I think, if they are in their straight mind.
Now,
Because,
some, I'm sorry.
yes, yeah, go
No, I was
ahead.
going to say, if someone were to say, like, the document of Vatican II, the Nostra Aetate, that because it does say there that the Muslims, they, well, claiming that they worship the God of Abraham, therefore they worship the same God as us. So in that sense, but that's a claim that really that they make, which is true. They make that claim, but I think you're right in the sense that in actuality, it's not true. I mean, again, I mentioned this in a prior video. Allah is the greatest of all deceivers. Allah is definitely, I mean, there's a lot of It's almost like in Islam, you don't even need the devil in a sense. Allah does, many barbarous things, and he ingratiates Muhammad with his desires. So, but what do you respond to that that declaration in, I believe it's a declaration in Vatican II that says that we do worship the same God? Um, can that be harmonized with? I think it can be with what you're saying in a sense.
Yeah, to claim that we both honor the God of Abraham, yeah, but still that God has a very different descriptions.
Right,
The,
right,
the Muslim God is very different from the Christian God. First of all, the Christian God is Trinitarian, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. The Muslims will definitely deny that. Um, they will say Christ is a, as, at best a prophet, but nothing more. He's not the Son of God. And besides, the Muslim God is very authoritarian. And the Christian God is not authoritarian. He accepts human freedom. Uh,
that's right.
I have my doubt that the Islam God does the same. But I won't go into that discussion. For when you put things together in an offensive way, you only hurt people. I always like what Pope Benedict said. Uh, I have respect for other religions, including Muslims, but I don't respect their beliefs.
That's right. That's
That
right.
that makes a very big difference. So
That's
I think what we have here is that we have to accept that the God of Islam is very different from the God of Christians. So to use that example of Venus again,
right.
um, there is also a Venus as a Greek goddess. Is the Greek goddess the same as the Venus planet? Of course not. Everyone with a sound mind will say they are very different. And then there is a Venus in horoscopes. They are all very different. And to say that they basically are the same is a very daring conclusion that I want to fight in a way. But fights are always polarizing. But we have to keep a straight mind. And we have to realize that there is a lot of misunderstanding in the discussion that we say we all honor the same God. We don't.
Right. Right.
Maybe the reference is different, but definitely the description of all those gods. And there are some very weird religions. Um, I consider Scientology one of those. New Age, uh, maybe UFOs, especially when it becomes a cult. They all declare God very different from the God that people in Christianity claim.
I
So
think you're right
we
when you
have
say
many
that.
different Venuses, very
Right.
different Venuses. And I
Yeah,
don't
no,
want to send a satellite to the Venus of Aristotle,
right.
or we will miss that Venus very much.
Yeah,
Okay, sorry.
no, no, I think I like the distinction you made between reference and description. So even though there's the same reference, there are different descriptions, but to God. But if the description is so essentially different that it seems like it even affects the reference. Like, how can you even refer to the same thing if the description is so off? It's like if someone were describing you, let's say I know you very well, someone else is describing you, they're so off that I say, well, that's not you. Now, obviously, there's no other God, right? But the thing is, you can start attributing God, certain characteristics that are so off that you're referring to a being that really doesn't exist. It's not like another God exists, unless which you mentioned, the lowercase g God, which is, the demons. Um, but I also like how you really you distinguish well syncretism and you kind of leave it open to which what we call in Catholicism inculturation, which is not the same thing, which Christianity is able to purify pagan elements, but it doesn't, there's not, the truth does not consist of each part coming together as a whole, which you mentioned, and this is very logical. How do we know what parts are really if no one knows what the whole is? Like, how do you know you have a part? And then and then you talk about again going to your relativism aspect that some of the parts are contradictory. So then how can they complement each other if they're contradictory? By definition, it doesn't make any sense. But yeah, if you want to close off on the syncretism, but I thought those were good points.
Yeah. Oh, I agree fully with what you said. But contradictions are always very dangerous. They tell you it's a warning sign. If you have a contradiction, there is something wrong. If you have a square circle, there's something wrong. You have to make clear why you come to that. So, because there are so many religions, is that a reason to say all of them are only partially true? No. To use again the elephant, one religion knows about the elephant. And if we know that, then people are just talking about a little detail. We know that is not the full truth. That is just part of what you, with your blindness, happen to touch. So, what I would say, if there are so many religions, how can we distinguish the right ones from the wrong ones? And in my book, I explain that that is done by faith and reason. Catholics are known for faith and reason. Uh, Pope John Paul II, he wrote an encyclical on that issue, but it's a very old issue from the beginning of Christianity. So Catholics are thinkers. That sounds weird, but it's as St. Augustine said, in believing, they think, and in thinking, they believe. Those two go together. And if a religion goes against reason, then there is something wrong with that religion. I call that a litmus test of
Right.
all religions. If it's against reason, forget about that religion. Even if they claim that they are talking about God, even if that is maybe true in a very weird sense, don't accept it, reject it.
Right.
So,
Right.
uh, as Chesterton always said, if you don't believe in God, then you believe in anything.
Right. Right.
And syncretism has come up with the weirdest things that people are beginning to believe in. And I gave a few examples in the book, and I won't repeat that. And I would say for people who want to know that, you have to read that book.
Yeah, it's a really excellent book, and reason as universally accessible to all men definitely makes sense, and it makes Catholicism really the only true intellectual religion out there because of this incorporation of reason. We recognize reason as God-given natural source of knowledge. So the Catholic is guided by reason, illuminated by faith. And as Leo, not Saint Leo, Leo the 13th says in his encyclical Aeterni Patris, that reason can smoothen the path to the faith. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's spot on. That's a what again, your book reading it, it's like a breath of fresh air of clarity because there is just such a lack of clarity. And if I can just address this last point, then we'll transition to Gnosticism. I like also when you talk about the praying together or praying with one another. I forget the distinction you make exactly. Not pray together, but pray at the same time. But you say praying together is not. It can denote communion, which is especially if it's like ritualistic prayer. But prayer, we shouldn't really be praying, at least in a formal sense, with other religions. I don't know if you want to just address that last point, and then we'll go into Gnosticism.
No, I agree. It's praying together, if you have very different beliefs, becomes a little strange, actually. it's a very strange thing. How can you pray together to? Are you praying to the Venus of Galileo or the Venus of Ptolemy, or are you praying to the Venus of horoscopes? Can we do that? The prayer becomes worthless, useless. When you pray, I think that is the strong part of Christianity. We say, I believe in God, the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth, and it goes on and on. Most people will recognize that it's not a prayer in itself, but it will say what you believe in. And that is very important to know. I see sometimes, like uh, postcards, even on towels, it has the word believe. I think, believe in what? That is a fake, empty shell statement. Believe, believe, believe. As if
Yes.
belief is all one thing. No, it isn't. You believe in certain things. It needs content and not just a reference. I
Right.
believe in God, yeah, but which God? There are many images of God, and some are very contradictory to others. Contradictions are always signs that there is something wrong in your assumptions. And what I always like in Christianity, especially Thomas Aquinas, he has many proofs of God's existence. We can prove that God exists. Which God? The ones that we can prove. And all the other gods are idols. The
That's right.
Old Testament makes always very big distinction between the God of Israel, the God of Judea, Judaism, and the idols of the Egyptians, of the Greeks, etc. And if you confuse those, then you are really in trouble. And syncretism usually leads to that some people have very strange ideas about God and what he stands for. But Thomas Aquinas will tell us we need a reason to do that. A reason to prepare the mind, to explain the truths of faith, and to defend the truths of faith.
That's right.
That's called apologetics. And Catholics are good at apologetics. Some Protestants are too, but sometimes they become victims of syncretism. And
Right.
then we are calling in trouble, 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 trouble.
Right. Right. And that's really just kind of segueing to the next destructive doctrine is very much related to Gnosticism because each person in their part or at least in their dogmatic relativism, they believe that they are in truth, like in the sense that it is become it's an irrational belief, um, and it leads to a sense to a Gnostic type of belief that I'm saved through this type of knowledge, but this knowledge almost in a sense, fabricated by me. But if you want to talk a little bit about Gnosticism, because there's a lot there. Obviously, it's a very complex issue, has a lot of history.
You are right.
You
Yeah,
mentioned, but
yeah.
go ahead if you can talk a little bit about Gnosticism and why is it so destructive um, for man?
It is, to put it in very clear terms, Gnostics, they make a very big difference between the body and the soul. We all know that there are bodies that have a soul and souls are in the body. And Gnostics say that the body is from the evil part of this world, and the soul is from the good part of this world. So they create a dichotomy, a separation between those two. And that is very destructive. Um, St. Augustine, for a while, was a Gnostic until he discovered that that is something very wrong. So what happened to Gnostics? Do they still exist? Oh yeah, they still exist, even though you don't know it sometimes. And the big difference between body and soul is destructive, because then you can have a body without a soul, and you can have a soul without a body. And St. Thomas Aquinas, my favorite theologian, as you realize by now, will say there is no soul without a body and no body without a soul. Yeah, some people will say when you die, the soul goes to heaven and the body stays in the earth, in the tomb, in the wherever, or in the ashes. But unfortunately, that split is not right, because the, I believe in God the Father Almighty, and at the end it says, and I believe in the resurrection of the body. The body is very important in Christianity. It's part of who you are. And your body is partly the reason why you have an identity. Of course, the soul is that part too, but you cannot really pull them apart. But if you pull them apart, you get into all kind of trouble. I maintain that the discussions we have nowadays about gender and that kind of stuff, which I discuss in my book in a separate chapter, is those genderists that they say your body determines who you are. No, your soul determines who you are. If you think you are a female, though your body is a male, then you are a female,
Right. That's a Gnostic.
because
Yeah.
you go by one part and you forget about the role of the body. The role of the body is very important. That's why Jesus was taken up to heaven, body and soul, and not just his soul, his divinity. He became a human being with a human body, and the human body is the one that suffered and was nailed on the cross.
Right, right. No, it's really interesting. I didn't even think about the whole trans ideology as a neo-Gnosticism, which
Yeah,
is fascinating. Yeah, the soul, the arbitrary wishes of the soul can really counteract the realities of the body, but that's not true at all. Um, I like how you mentioned that really all the heresies, which are deep down philosophical errors, they stem from Gnosticism. You mentioned that in your book, like Arianism, Docetism, Apollinarianism. I think I'm adding an extra syllable there. And there's another heresy that you mentioned there, but it's interesting that really how this Gnosticism, which putting the soul over the body, has led to other barbarities, we can say, in the Middle Ages and little afterwards. Can you mention that a little bit when you talk about the Cathars or the Manichaeans and then the Cathars, and you can obviously see the destructiveness of that, but if you could talk a little bit about that, the Cathars rather.
yeah. Cathars, they played a big role in history. And Saint Dominic, the founder of the Dominican Fathers, discovered them when he went to the southern part of France. And he thought, phew, what kind of people is this? So, and he considered it very dangerous. And you can see why when you have a Christian background. And those Cathars, they basically said the body doesn't really matter, and you can do with the body whatever you want because it's completely irrelevant. And he kept fighting that, and the church kept fighting it. And the idea that beliefs, souls, is the only thing that counts is a dangerous one for human life too. We have to honor the reality of the human body. And thanks to science, we know much more about that human body, and unfortunately not about the human soul, for that is not a scientific issue. Science only studies what can be counted, measured, and analyzed. So science cannot help us with that issue. But at least it is good that it takes the human body very seriously. But we know that there is much more to a human body. When a person is suffering, that is not just a medical issue, that is also an issue of the soul. And then we go into the difficult issue of body and soul. And I don't think we will solve that in this short interview.
Yeah, yeah. Do you think though, do you see Gnosticism also in the type of kind of a reductive view where people think, oh, oh, sorry, they know all things, right? Where I know everything. This doesn't exist because I know it doesn't exist. It's kind of like a I don't want to say rationalism, but it's almost like a rationalization where they think they're in the know. They have the gnosis. They have this infallible knowledge of reality or of how things are that they're not open. So does Gnosticism kind of close us in a way? And what are some of the newer effects? This is towards the end of the chapter. What are some of the more recent or modern effects of Gnosticism?
And I think a lot of New Age beliefs
Mhm.
are Gnostic. And yeah, I always like to pronounce the G at the beginning of Gnosticism, but I know that is not still English. But uh, yeah, that is still an important part of it. And as I said, all beliefs of gender are basically Gnostic. They say that you are, as a soul, you are in charge of the body, and the body will just do whatever you think it can do and should do. So, is it still active today? Oh, yes, very much so. That's why I spend the whole chapter on that book. But there are many more. When you look at humanism, that has also very strong Gnostic issues. Spiritism has Gnostic issues. So I mentioned them in separate chapters of the book. So
Excellent,
there
excellent.
is a
No,
lot of stuff in this book.
there's a lot, and I mean, you can literally on just one chapter, you can give a course on it, of course. It's really in depth, but I would advise people to get the book, read it for yourselves, and yeah, it's just an excellent, very clear, concise, and again, it's very necessary today. And from the reviews, what I'm saying is the reviews are saying the same thing. Those who have reviewed it. So just as a last question, if you can say in general, why are these destructive to society? So someone asks, okay, you're just saying how you're giving value judgments basically, but how are these destructive? Why are they destructive? And then that would be the last kind of.
Because they pull our thinking apart. They are against reason. And if you are against reason, you are on a slippery slope. And besides, not only are they against reason, they are also against common sense. So if you declare something that is against common sense, you attack humanity at the core.
Mhm.
And that's why it's very destructive. And it leads, as we discussed already with syncretism and Gnosticism, it has side effects. It's like a disease in the body has very often side effects. And sometimes the side effects are worse than the disease. So in the cases I mentioned in the book, they are destructive because against reason, against common sense, and of course, against our religion. But for people who don't have our religion, that might not be a very powerful argument. But I think the other two reasons are important to keep them out of your life. Don't sell your soul to these destructive doctrines.
Right, right, and
If I
pursue.
may conclude it with that,
Yeah, yeah, that sounds good. And in the end, pursue the truth. And if you are a sincere and reasonable person, by God's grace, you should become Catholic. I mean, it would lead you to to Catholicism, which is again the only religion that that puts reason on the pedestal, that we give value to reason, within a sound, right, in a sound sense, because we recognize it as God given. So this is the whole purpose of the channel. The purpose of this channel is really to promote Catholic intellectualism, which is kind of dying, sound Catholic intellectualism, of course. And yeah, this book definitely contributes to that. So again, get this book and stay tuned for future episodes, because I would like to invite the good doctor here for a future episode talking about the other doctrines. There's many doctrines in this book, but we only give you a taste of it so you actually buy the book, right? This is it. The title from En Route Publisher, The Destructive Doctrines of Our Age, and I'll leave the link in the description. And yeah, well, thank you very much, doctor, for coming on, and God bless you.
Th- Thank you, Raphael, for your good summaries, for your good choices, and for giving me a chance to talk about it.
All right, thank you
Thanks
very
a
much.
lot.
All right.